Detroit's late October wind carried the smell of rust and old promises broken too many times to count. Marcus Dalton stood at the edge of an empty bus lot, the kind of place where hope came to die quietly between cracked asphalt and chain link fence. 52 years pressed heavy on shoulders that had carried better weight in better times. The backpack slung over one arm held everything that mattered now, which meant it held almost nothing at all. 2 years since Sarah's last breath in that hospice room that smelled like industrial cleaner and failure. Cancer had taken her slowly, the way fire takes a house when there's no water left to fight it. The rings he'd slipped onto her fingers 17 years back sat in a pawn shop somewhere on Woodward Avenue now, traded for 3 months' rent on a studio apartment he couldn't afford to keep. No children had come from their marriage. No small hands to hold when the nurses finally turned off the machines. Just stone in the hollow space where a family might have been. 3 years before Sarah died, Danny Kane, reaper to the club, brother to Stone in every way that mattered, caught 2 bullets in a parking lot outside Bakersfield. A deal gone wrong, they said. Ambush, Stone knew. The kind of thing that happened when you wore the Hells Angels patch and trusted the wrong people with the wrong information. Stone had been there when they zipped the body bag, had been the one to call Danny's mother and listen to her scream through a phone line that couldn't carry half the weight of what needed saying. He'd left California the week after they put Danny in the ground. Left the club, left the brothers, left the whole brotherhood that had defined him since his Marine discharge in '98. Didn't say goodbye, just packed the Harley and rode until the Pacific Ocean was a memory he could almost forget. Detroit had been far enough, cold enough, dead enough to match what he felt inside. For 3 years, he'd fixed motorcycles in a garage off Michigan Avenue, collecting just enough cash to keep the lights on and the whiskey bottle within reach. No plans, no future, just the mechanical repetition of wrenches and oil changes and trying not to think about all the people who weren't there anymore. Sarah's voice still came to him sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn when sleep refused its duty. Her last words, rasped through lungs that had forgotten how to work properly. Promise me you'll find something to live for, Marcus. Not just survive. Live. He'd promised because dying people deserved whatever comfort lies could provide. But standing here in this forgotten corner of a dying city, Stone knew he'd broken that promise every day since. The flyer in his jacket pocket had been crumpled and smoothed so many times the paper felt like cloth. Detroit Land Bank auction. Properties, starting at 100. The city was hemorrhaging houses faster than it could count them, offloading seized assets from criminals and tax cheats and families who'd simply given up. Stone had $1,700 in his bank account and nowhere particular to spend it. A roof over his head seemed like something worth having, even if he didn't much care what happened under that roof. The auction house on Graciote Avenue smelled like municipal desperation and old coffee. 30, maybe 40 people scattered through folding chairs, most of them developers with sharp eyes and sharper calculators. Stone took a seat in the back, keeping the leather cut he'd never quite been able to throw away hidden under a canvas jacket. No point advertising old affiliations in a room full of strangers. The auctioneer, a tired woman with reading glasses on a chain, worked through the list with the enthusiasm of someone reading obituaries. Burned-out bungalows on the east side, gutted Victorians in Brush Park, commercial spaces with shattered windows and dreams to match. Stone let them all pass, waiting for the one property that had caught his attention when he'd scrolled through the listings at a library computer 3 days ago. The woman's voice flattened as she read the next lot. Item 47, Ruggiero Estate, Indian Village. 3-story brick Victorian, circa 1925. Seized by federal authorities in 1984. Abandoned. No warranty of condition. Starting bid $100. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with respect. Someone in the third row laughed, short and ugly. A man in a suit muttered something about curses and bad investments. Stone watched 2 couples stand up and leave without bothering to hide their disgust. He knew the stories. Everyone in Detroit knew the stories. The Ruggiero family had run half the organized crime in the city from the 30s through the 80s. Extortion, gambling, worse things that didn't make it into polite conversation. The FBI raid in '84 had been front-page news for months. Bodies found in walls, children missing. A whole empire built on suffering, finally brought down by federal warrants in witness testimony that cost lives to secure. The house had sat empty ever since. 40 years of rot and rumor, waiting for someone desperate enough or stupid enough to claim it. Stone raised his hand. The auctioneer blinked like she'd misheard reality. A few heads turned. Most didn't bother. The woman recovered her professional mask and nodded. $100 to bidder 97. Going once, twice, she paused, giving the universe one last chance to produce someone saner. Sold. Stone was halfway to the cashier window when footsteps clicked up behind him. Expensive leather on linoleum. A voice smooth as poisoned honey cut through the air. You just bought a death sentence for $100. That's either brave or monumentally stupid. Turning, Stone found himself facing a man who looked like he'd been assembled in a boardroom. Mid-30s, suit that cost more than Stone's Harley, hair slicked back with product that probably had a French name. Dark eyes held the kind of calculation that came from counting other people's weaknesses. Vincent Ruggiero. The man extended a hand Stone didn't take. The smile never reached those calculating eyes. My family used to own that property. You're the first person in 4 decades dumb enough to bid on it. Stone kept his face neutral, the way he'd learned in Fallujah when insurgents tried to read fear in American features. Just looking for a roof. Vincent's laugh carried all the warmth of a mortgage foreclosure. A roof, in a house where people disappeared, where the FBI found cells in the basement, where half the neighbors still won't walk past after dark. He stepped closer, voice dropping to something almost intimate. Tell you what, you survive 3 nights in that place, I'll buy it back from you for $10,000. That's 100 times your investment. Easy money for a man who looks like he could use it. The insult landed exactly where Vincent intended, somewhere in the gap between Stone's worn boots and this peacock's Italian loafers. But Stone had been insulted by better men in worse places. He met Vincent's eyes with the flat stare that came from watching friends die and learning not to flinch. If it once belonged to the devil, I'll make it a home. For a second, something flickered behind Vincent's mask. Surprise, maybe, or the recognition that some men couldn't be bought with money or fear. Then the smile reasserted itself, sharp as a knife. We'll see. 3 nights, Marcus Dalton. I'll be counting. Stone didn't ask how Vincent knew his name. Men like that always knew more than they should. At the cashier window, a woman with a name tag reading Gloria processed his payment with the enthusiasm of someone filing death certificates. She handed over keys that felt heavier than their metal had any right to be. You sure about this, honey? That house? It's got a history. Everything in Detroit's got a history. Stone pocketed the keys. Doesn't mean the future can't be different. Gloria's expression said she'd heard that kind of hope before and knew how it ended, but she didn't argue. Just pushed the deed across the counter and wished him luck in a tone that suggested he'd need more than luck could provide. Outside, the October afternoon had gone gray and cold. Stone was unlocking the Harley when another voice cut through the parking lot. You're going to get yourself killed. The speaker stood beside a battered pickup truck. Late 60s, maybe 70, with the kind of face that had seen decades accumulate in the lines around skeptical eyes. Work clothes that had been washed 1,000 times, hands scarred from a lifetime of honest labor. Harold Sullivan. The man didn't offer a handshake, just a nod that carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. People call me Hank. I live 3 houses down from the Ruggiero place. Been there 40 years, long enough to watch that mansion go from crime scene to ghost story. Stone studied him, the way Hank stood, the directness of his gaze, the carpenter's calluses on those weathered hands. This wasn't some curious neighbor looking for gossip. This was a warning delivered by someone who'd earned the right to give it. I appreciate the concern. Stone kept his tone level, neither grateful nor dismissive. But I've lived through worse than haunted houses. Hank's eyes tracked to the canvas jacket, seemed to see through it to the leather cut underneath. Hell's Angels. Used to be. Marines before that, I guess. You got that look? Hank pulled a pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket, offered one that Stone declined. I was Detroit PD for 30 years. Retired carpenter now, but I still remember things, like the raid on that house in '84. I was one of the first through the door. That got Stone's attention. Hank lit his cigarette, took a drag that looked more like ritual than pleasure. Lorenzo Ruggiero ran the worst kind of operation. Human trafficking, mostly. Children. The words came out flat, stripped of emotion by the weight of memory. The FBI found evidence of dozens of victims, bodies in the walls, cells in the basement, things I still dream about sometimes. Then why's the house still standing? Federal seizure means federal bureaucracy. Took them 20 years just to finish cataloging evidence. By the time they cleared it for auction, nobody wanted to touch it, except you, apparently. Hank flicked ash onto the pavement. Vincent Ruggiero is Lorenzo's grandson. Word is he's been trying to buy back family properties, rebuild the empire his grandfather lost. You just became an obstacle to that plan. Stone felt the weight of those keys in his pocket, suddenly understanding why Vincent's challenge had carried edges beneath its surface. He threatened me? Men like Vincent don't threaten directly. They make offers that sound generous until you realize saying no has consequences. Hank dropped the cigarette, crushed it under a boot heel. You want my advice? Take his money, walk away, find some other roof to sleep under. That house has already claimed enough lives. But walking away would mean another motel room, another month of barely scraping by, another stretch of empty days bleeding into empty nights. Stone had been walking away from things for 3 years. The weight of that accumulated retreat was starting to crush him under its own momentum. I'll keep that in mind. Stone swung onto the Harley, kick-started the engine into a growl that said the conversation was over. Thanks for the history lesson. Hank's expression shifted, resignation mixed with something that might have been respect. You're going anyway, stubborn bastard. He reached into the truck bed, pulled out a toolbox that had seen better decades. I was a carpenter before I was a cop. Still know my way around wooden nails. You decide you want to make that place lovable instead of just sleeping in it. Come find me. I got time and nothing better to do with it. Something in Stone's chest loosened, just slightly, the first offer of help he'd received in longer than he could remember. He nodded, revved the engine, and pointed the Harley toward Indian Village. The neighborhood announced itself in the architecture. Grand old mansions built when Detroit meant money and power. When automotive barons and industrial titans lived in houses that demanded respect. Indian Village had been the jewel in the city's crown once. Now it was a reminder that all kingdoms eventually fall. Half the houses stood empty, windows boarded or shattered, lawns surrendered to wilderness. The ones still occupied wore their survival like armor, fresh paint over old wounds, burglar bars dressed up as decorative ironwork. Residents who'd chosen to stay in a place most people had written off as terminal. The Ruggiero mansion rose at the end of a street where the streetlights had died years ago. 3 stories of red brick Victorian ambition gone to ruin. Stone killed the engine 2 houses away and just looked at what he'd bought for $100 and whatever remained of his faith in new beginnings. The brick facade showed spiderweb cracks that had nothing to do with settling and everything to do with neglect. Patches of exterior wall had fallen away completely, exposing the gray underlayment like bone beneath rotted flesh. The balcony railings twisted at angles that defied their original engineering, as if giant hands had bent them for sport. The front door, thick oak that had probably been magnificent once, showed black streaks where 40 years of rainwater had found entry points through a failing frame. 2 stone angel statues flanked the entrance, both decapitated. Their severed heads lay in the overgrown grass, blank stone eyes staring at nothing. The wings had been broken off too, scattered across what had once been a manicured lawn. Guardians who'd failed their duty and been punished for it. Stone dismounted, pulled the keys from his pocket, and forced himself to walk up the cracked pathway. October wind pushed dead leaves around his boots. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went silent, as if it had realized the futility of making noise in a place this far gone. The front door lock resisted, rust fighting the key's intrusion, before surrendering with a groan that sounded almost alive. Stone pushed, and the hinges screamed, metal on metal, a sound like something dying slowly. The noise echoed through the empty house and out into the street, announcing his arrival to whatever waited inside. Darkness met him at the threshold. The dim October light penetrated maybe 10 feet into the enormous front hall before giving up entirely. Stone pulled out his phone, activated the flashlight, and stepped across the boundary between the world of the living and whatever this place had become. The smell hit first: damp rot, decayed wood, old metal oxidizing in the dark. The signature scent of places forgotten too long, where time itself had started to spoil. Dust motes swirled in the flashlight beam, thick enough to taste. The floor beneath his boots was mosaic tile, intricate patterns barely visible beneath decades of grime. Above, a chandelier hung from the ceiling, crystal that had probably sparkled once, before 40 years without cleaning turned it into a monument to entropy. Several pieces had fallen, shattered on the floor below in patterns that looked almost intentional. The light from Stone's phone caught the remaining shards, threw fragmented reflections across walls that had once been white. Those walls told their own story. Portraits lined the main hall, oil paintings of generations that must have been the Ruggiero family. But someone, FBI investigators maybe, or vandals who'd broken in after, had slashed every face from forehead to chin. Systematic destruction that left the backgrounds intact, but erased the humanity from every canvas. Anonymous figures in expensive clothes, their identities carved away with methodical violence. Stone moved deeper into the house, flashlight beams sweeping across abandoned grandeur. The living room opened to his left, vast enough to host parties for 100 guests. Furniture remained, shrouded in dust sheets that had decayed into gossamer. A fireplace large enough to stand and dominated one wall, its mantel carved with cherubs whose stone faces bore the same vandalism as the portraits. To the right, a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves sagged under the weight of books that had absorbed 40 years of humidity and started composting in place. Many showed charred edges, as if someone had tried to burn specific volumes before giving up or being interrupted. A massive walnut desk sat in the center, its surface still bearing the cut-open remains of an FBI evidence seal over what looked like a Detroit city map from the 70s. The dining room stretched beyond the library, long tables still set with rotting linens, as if the family had stood up mid-meal and never returned. Broken wine glasses littered the floor, dark stains on the tablecloth that might have been wine, might have been something worse. The whole scene suggested interruption, case a fight. Stone's flashlight found the staircase leading to the second floor, then swung lower. The space beneath those stairs showed darkness that the phone's beam couldn't quite penetrate. He moved closer and the light caught metal, a door where no door should have been. Gray steel, nearly 2 meters tall. The kind of industrial barrier that belonged in a prison or a bunker, not a Victorian mansion. The lock wasn't residential. Stone had seen enough military hardware to recognize security measures designed for holding rather than keeping out. Long scratches ran from the door's center down to the wooden floor, deep grooves that could have been claws or fingernails or something metal dragged across the wood by someone desperate to escape. Stone reached out, touched the door's surface, cold. Colder than the ambient temperature had any right to make it. He tried the handle, locked solid, unmoved by pressure that would have budged a normal residential door. Behind him, the house settled with a groan that sounded almost conversational. Upstairs, something creaked, wood expanding in temperature shifts probably. Nothing supernatural, just an old house doing what old houses do. Stone pulled back from the steel door, made himself walk away from it. He'd explore the basement later when he had proper tools and daylight. Right now, he needed to establish basic habitability. Find a room that wasn't completely ruined, clear enough space to lay out the sleeping bag from his backpack, maybe get some of the windows open to air out 40 years of stagnation. The second floor offered bedrooms in various states of decay. Most had been stripped by salvagers or FBI evidence collection. Bare walls, empty closets, rectangles of cleaner wallpaper where furniture had once stood. Stone chose the smallest room, one that still had intact windows and a door that closed. The floor seemed solid. The ceiling showed only minor water damage. He swept the worst of the debris into a corner with his boot, unrolled the sleeping bag, and sat down with his back against the wall. From here, he could see out the window, the dead neighborhood, the other abandoned mansions, the street lights that would never come on again. Indian Village at dusk looked like the end of civilization rendered in brick and broken glass. His phone buzzed, a text from the garage where he'd been working. "Heard you bought a house? You quit on us?" Stone thumbed back a reply about needing a few days to settle in, knowing he was burning that bridge but unable to care enough to preserve it. The job had been temporary anyway. Everything in his life was temporary. As night fell, Stone ate cold beans from a can and tried not to think about Sarah. Tried not to hear Danny's voice in the wind that whistled through cracks in the window frame. Tried not to calculate how many days he could survive on what remained in his bank account if this gamble failed. The house had other plans for silence. As darkness completed its claim on Indian Village, the mansion began to speak in the language of old buildings, wood settling, pipes contracting, foundations shifting under seasonal temperature changes. Footsteps that weren't footsteps crossed the third floor. A door opened and closed somewhere distant. The chandelier in the front hall swayed, creating shadows that danced across walls like memories of parties that would never happen again. Stone had spent enough time in war zones to know the difference between genuine threat and the mind's tendency to manufacture danger from uncertainty. The house wasn't haunted, it was just old and empty and protesting his intrusion into its long abandonment. He dozed fitfully, jarred awake by unfamiliar sounds and the profound discomfort of sleeping on a hard floor at 52. Around 11 he got up, walked the second floor to reassure himself that no one else was there, checked the windows to confirm they were still secure. Everything normal, everything fine. Midnight arrived with the finality of a judge's gavel. Stone was lying on his back, staring at ceiling cracks and trying to will his body into sleep, when the sound came from directly beneath him. 3 knocks. Deliberate, evenly spaced. Unmistakably human. Knock, knock, knock. Stone's body went rigid, every nerve suddenly alert. He placed his palm flat against the wooden floor, feeling the vibration of his own pulse and waiting to see if the sound repeated. It did. Same rhythm, same force, same location, directly under this room. Knock, 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 not random, not the house settling, not pipes or temperature shifts or any of the rational explanations his mind tried to supply. This was someone down there in that basement with the steel door, making deliberate contact with the world above. Stone was on his feet before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He grabbed his phone, activated the flashlight, and moved toward the stairs. Every Marine drill instructor he'd ever had would have told him this was stupid, going toward unknown danger in unfamiliar terrain with inadequate equipment. But those same instructors had also taught him that leaving someone behind was worse than any tactical mistake. If there was someone down there, someone who needed help, Stone couldn't walk away from that. He'd walked away from enough already. The steel door waited under the stairs, exactly as cold as it had been hours before. Stone examined the lock more carefully now, his phone light revealing details he'd missed in earlier inspection. Not just prison-grade hardware. This was the kind of security designed to keep people in, not out. The scratches around the lock suggested previous attempts at forced entry, none successful. Stone went back out to the Harley, retrieved the toolkit from his saddlebag. The crowbar felt solid in his hands, familiar weight that had opened locked doors in 3 different countries during his service years. He wedged the flat end into the gap between door and frame, found purchase, and threw his weight against the lever. Metal shrieked against metal. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. Stone adjusted his grip, braced his feet, and pulled harder. Something inside the lock mechanism gave way with a crack that echoed through the empty mansion. The steel door swung open with a long, groaning exhale, like lungs that hadn't drawn breath in 40 years finally being allowed to function again. Cold air rushed out from the darkness below, carrying smells that made Stone's stomach clench. Earth and old stone and something organic that had decomposed long ago. His phone light showed stairs descending into blackness, so complete it seemed to absorb the illumination rather than reflect it. He started down, one step at a time, testing each tread before committing his weight. The stairs were concrete, industrial-grade construction that had nothing to do with the Victorian elegance above. This was military or government work, built to last, built to contain. The basement opened into a space that violated every expectation. Not a root cellar or storage area, but a complex that sprawled beneath the entire footprint of the house above. Poured concrete walls, air ducts running across ceilings, security cameras from the 70s mounted in corners, their lenses dark and dead. Stone's light found an interrogation chair in the far corner. Metal frame, leather restraints hanging loose. The seat itself covered in rust and something darker that could have been blood 40 years dried. To the right, an industrial safe nearly 2 meters tall, its doors sealed shut. The exterior scorched black as if someone had tried burning it open and failed. A narrow tunnel disappeared into darkness beyond the main space, brick-lined and sloping downward. An escape route, probably, the kind of contingency planning that criminal organizations built into their operations. Stone filed that away for later investigation and kept moving. The air down here held weight, thickness, as if fear itself had mass, and these walls had absorbed enough of it over the years to become saturated. Stone had felt this before, in buildings where terrible things happened. The residue of human suffering, clinging to concrete and metal long after the victims were gone. Near the end of the main corridor, sound reached him, faint, barely audible over his own breathing, but unmistakable once heard. Sobbing, quiet, suppressed, the kind of crying that came from someone who'd learned that making noise brought punishment. Stone's chest tightened. He moved faster now, phone light sweeping across more concrete, more evidence of a facility built for purposes that had nothing to do with family basements and everything to do with keeping people where they couldn't escape. The final door was smaller than the steel barrier at the top of the stairs, but constructed with the same brutal efficiency. Adult head height, locked from the outside with a horizontal slot like prison doors used for passing food or mail. Stone touched the surface, cold as everything else down here, but the metal around the lock showed recent wear, fresh scratches that suggested this door had been opened sometime in the last few months, not 4 decades ago. He gripped the crowbar, wedged it into the locking mechanism and pulled. The lock resisted, then gave with a crack that sounded like breaking bones. The door swung inward, releasing air that smelled like unwashed bodies and fear and despair. Stone shone his light into the cell. A figure huddled in the far corner, small, child-sized, arms wrapped around pulled-up knees. Long, dark hair fell across a face turned away from the light. The clothes were simple cotton dress, torn and dirty, completely out of place in this concrete prison. Don't. The voice was small, female, young, maybe 9 or 10 years old. Don't take me back to them. I don't know how long I've been here. Please don't let them take me again. Every muscle in Stone's body locked. He'd expected empty rooms, maybe evidence of historical crimes, possibly rats or structural damage. Not this. Not a child. Still breathing. Still terrified. Still very much alive in a basement that shouldn't have had any living occupants. He forced himself to move slowly, to crouch down, to make himself smaller and less threatening. You're safe now. His voice came out rougher than intended, unused to offering comfort. I'm not one of them. I just bought this house. I'm going to get you out of here. The girl looked up then, and Stone's phone light caught eyes circled with exhaustion and malnutrition, skin pale enough that bones showed stark beneath. She was Asian, Chinese or Vietnamese, hard to tell in the dim light. Her lips trembled, trying to form words, before she launched herself forward and wrapped thin arms around Stone's neck. He caught her automatically, feeling how light she was, how fragile. She was shaking, full-body tremors that spoke to cold and fear, and however many days or weeks she'd spent locked in this darkness. My name is Lily, she whispered into his shoulder, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of someone reclaiming identity after having it stripped away. Stone stood, Lily still clinging to him, and surveyed the cell with new horror. Bare concrete walls, a thin mattress stained with things he didn't want to identify. No windows, no light. A true light-proof cell, the kind people built when they wanted to break someone's mind along with their spirit. Tally marks covered one wall, scratched into concrete with fingernails or a rock or whatever tool Lily had found. Stone counted them quickly. 87 marks. 87 days if each mark represented a day. 3 months in this darkness. But the house had been empty for 40 years. The math didn't work unless understanding hit like cold water. Someone had been using this basement recently. After the FBI raid, after the seizure, someone had returned to the Ruggiero mansion and rebuilt its terrible machinery. The steel door Stone had forced open wasn't original construction. Neither was the lock on Lily's cell, which showed fresh metal beneath the grime. This was active, current, ongoing. Stone's arms tightened protectively around the girl. Lily, who put you down here? Do you know their names? She shook her head against his shoulder. They wore suits, black suits. They said I was special, that I belonged to the family, that I had to stay here until I learned. Her voice broke off into quiet sobbing. Stone carried her toward the stairs, his mind already calculating. Call the police. Get Lily medical attention. Explain how he'd found her without sounding like the perpetrator himself. But as he reached the top of the stairs and emerged into the ground floor, lights flooded the windows, red and blue strobes, unmistakable and immediate. Multiple vehicles. He'd been so focused on Lily that he hadn't heard them arrive. Stone moved to the front window and looked out into a scene from his worst nightmares. 3 Detroit police cruisers blocked the street. 2 black SUVs with FBI markings had pulled up onto the dead lawn. Doors opened, armed personnel emerged, and at the center of it all stood a woman in FBI tactical gear who carried authority like other people carried weapons. Stone's phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number he didn't recognize. He answered, still holding Lily. Yeah? This is Detective Sarah Martinez, FBI. We've received reports of a possible abduction in progress at your location. Put down any weapons and come out with your hands visible. If you're holding a child, they release her immediately. Through the window, Stone watched Martinez raise a megaphone. Marcus Dalton, we know you're in there. We have the house surrounded. There's no exit that we haven't covered. Release the child and come out peacefully. Lily's grip on his neck tightened to the point of pain. They're going to take me back. Please don't let them take me back. Stone's mind raced through impossible options, all of them ending with him in handcuffs, and Lily returned to a system that had failed to notice her disappearance. He looked down at the girl in his arms, terrified, traumatized, trusting him because he was the first adult in 3 months who'd offered help instead of harm. Listen to me. He kept his voice steady, the way he'd learned to do under fire when panic meant death. I'm going to walk out there with you. They're going to separate us. You're going to be scared. But I promise you, I swear on everything I have left, they're not taking you back to whoever put you down there. I won't let that happen. Lily looked at him with eyes too old for her age, testing the promise against whatever experience had taught her about adult reliability. Finally, she nodded. Stone walked to the front door, opened it slowly with one hand while keeping the other arm around Lily. October wind hit his face, carrying the smell of exhaust and tactical gear and the accumulated weight of law enforcement waiting to make the wrong conclusion. He stepped onto the porch, into the glare of headlights and flashlights and the collective attention of people trained to see threats. My name is Marcus Dalton. I just found this child locked in the basement. She needs medical attention. I'm unarmed. Martinez lowered the megaphone, her expression shifting through confusion towards something harder. Put the child down. Hands on your head. Stone started to comply, but Lily's arms locked around his neck. No, don't take me. He saved me. They locked me up. He got me out. The words tumbled over each other, fear and desperation making them almost incomprehensible. Stone tried to soothe her, to explain that he had to do what they said, but the damage was already done. To the FBI agents and Detroit cops surrounding the house, this looked exactly like what they'd been called to investigate, a man with a child who didn't want to be separated, both emerging from a house with a documented history of child abuse. 2 agents rushed forward, guns holstered but hands ready. One grabbed Lily, the other shoved Stone against the doorframe hard enough that his head connected with wood. Stars burst across his vision. Someone was reading him his rights, the words familiar from cop shows, and nothing at all like hearing them applied to your own arrest. Lily screamed, high and raw and absolutely gutting. Stone tried to turn to see where they were taking her, but handcuffs were already going on his wrists. Cold metal bit into skin. An agent's knee pressed into his back, holding him prone while they made sure he wasn't armed. Detective Martinez? A male voice, younger, uncertain. The child is hysterical. Won't let us examine her. Keeps saying he saved me over and over. Martinez's boots appeared in Stone's limited field of vision. Separate them. Get the girl to a crisis counselor. This one goes to holding until we figure out what the hell is happening here. They hauled Stone upright, walked him to one of the cruisers while he twisted to catch a glimpse of Lily being loaded into an FBI SUV, her face pressed against the window, tear-streaked and terrified, mouth forming words he couldn't hear but understood perfectly. "Don't leave me." The cruiser door slammed shut, cutting off his view. Stone closed his eyes, felt the weight of 3 years accumulated failure pressing down until breathing became work. He'd found something to live for finally, a child who needed protecting, and within minutes the system had ripped it away and labeled him the threat. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. "Find something to live for, Marcus." He had, and immediately lost it. The cruiser pulled away from the Ruggiero mansion, taking Stone toward processing and questions, in a legal nightmare he had no resources to fight. Behind them, the house stood dark and patient, keeping its secrets, while the people who should have found them 40 years ago tried to make sense of fresh crimes in old spaces. The interrogation room at Detroit Police Headquarters smelled like institutional despair and burnt coffee. 3 hours of questions delivered by rotating investigators who seemed to believe repetition would crack him eventually. Stone gave them the same answers in the same flat tone. Bought the house, heard knocking, found the girl, called no one because he hadn't had time before the cavalry arrived. Martinez watched from behind one-way glass for the first 2 hours before joining the questioning directly. She carried a file thick enough to represent either thorough investigation or the grinding wheels of bureaucracy producing paperwork to justify decisions already made. "Your story doesn't make sense." She dropped the file on the metal table between them. "A child locked in a basement for 3 months, and you just happened to be the one who finds her on your first night in the house?" Stone met her eyes with the patience of someone who'd been interrogated by actual enemies in actual war zones. "Coincidences happen. You could verify my story by checking when I bought the property. 4 hours before I found her. Or you could have been using the house for months. The sale just provides cover. Then check security footage from the auction. Check my work records. I've been fixing bikes on Michigan Avenue for 3 years. Asked my landlord when I gave notice on my apartment. Yesterday morning, after I won the bid." Martinez's jaw tightened, frustration bleeding through professional composure. She wanted him to be guilty because guilty meant simple, meant case closed, meant not having to excavate 40 years of failure that lets someone turn a federal crime scene back into an active prison. A knock interrupted the stalemate. A younger agent stuck his head in. "Detective, the timeline checks. Land Bank confirms the sale this morning. We've got auction house footage showing him bidding. Employer confirms he worked yesterday, requested time off today." Martinez's expression shifted through several stages of recalibration before settling on something closer to anger directed elsewhere. "What about the girl's statement?" "Won't talk, just keeps asking for the man who saved her. Social services has her in protective custody, but she's completely shut down." Stone leaned back in his chair, the handcuffs making the movement awkward. "Maybe because you ripped her away from the first person who showed her kindness in 3 months. Maybe because to her, you look exactly like the system that failed to notice she was missing." Martinez stood, gathered her file, and walked to the door without looking back. "You're free to go, but don't leave the city. We'll have more questions." The desk sergeant, who returned Stone's belongings, wallet, keys, phone, the crowbar they'd bagged as evidence before deciding it was just a tool, handed everything over with the casual indifference of someone processing dozens of releases daily. No apology, no acknowledgement that 3 hours had been stolen on suspicion that evaporated under basic fact-checking. Outside, October dusk had settled over Detroit with the premature darkness of northern autumns. Stone's Harley sat where he'd left it that morning before everything fractured into nightmare logistics. He fired the engine, let the familiar vibrations settle his nerves, and rode back toward Indian Village. The first sign of violation came 3 blocks out. Front door hanging open, the darkness beyond suggesting more than just an unsecured entrance. Stone killed the engine a house away and approached on foot, senses cataloging details the way Marine training had burned into permanent reflex. Fresh tire tracks in the dead grass, footprints, multiple sets, dress shoes not work boots, leading from the curb to the door. No lights inside, but that meant nothing given the house hadn't had working electricity in 4 decades. He drew the folding knife from his jacket pocket, thumbed it open, and slipped through the doorway. The phone flashlight revealed chaos. Furniture upended. Bookshelves gutted. Volumes scattered across floors like casualties. Every drawer in the library desk pulled out and dumped, contents forming archaeological layers of old papers and decades-accumulated debris. Someone had searched the house with purpose and minimal concern for subtlety. Not FBI. They would have posted agents, secured the scene, followed procedure. This was something else. Something connected to Lily, to the basement, to whoever had been using the Ruggiero mansion as an active crime scene. Stone moved through rooms methodically, confirming he was alone before allowing himself to process the scope of the intrusion. The living room looked like a storm had hit it. The dining room showed evidence of drawers opened and closed more carefully, as if the searchers had gained focus as they progressed. The second floor revealed bedrooms rifled through with increasing frustration, his sleeping bag slashed open, the few possessions from his backpack examined and discarded. Only the basement remained undisturbed, the steel door still hanging open from where he'd forced it. Either the intruders already knew what was down there, or they'd been looking for something specific that wouldn't be kept in a prison cell. Figured they'd come back. Hank's voice from the front door nearly gave Stone a heart attack, despite years of combat drilling, surprise reactions into controlled responses. The old man stood silhouetted against streetlight, hands visible and empty. Saw them arrive about an hour after the FBI hauled you away. 3 men, black suits, professional, went through the place like they were looking for something particular. Stone crossed to the door, gestured Hank inside before closing it. You get a good look at them? Good enough to recognize the type. Italian, expensive clothes, moved like they owned the place. Vincent Ruggiero was my guess, even before one of them answered his phone, and I heard the name. Hank pulled a cigarette pack from his shirt, but didn't light one, just turned it over in weathered hands. They know about the girl. That's what they're after. Her or something connected to her. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Vincent's challenge at the auction, his certainty about the house's history, the way he'd known Stone's name without being told. This wasn't opportunistic crime. This was family business. Ruggiero business. The kind that had built an empire on human suffering and apparently never stopped despite federal intervention. The basement wasn't original construction. Stone led Hank to the steel door, shone his light down the concrete stairs. FBI raided this place in '84. You said you were there. Was this here then? Hank descended carefully, knees protesting the angle, and examined the walls with a contractor's eye. No, I remember the original basement. Dirt floor, stone foundation. Nothing special. This is newer. Professional work, but not 40 years old. The concrete's still curing in places. I'd say 10, maybe 15 years since this was poured. Stone pulled out his phone, pulled up calculator. FBI seized the property in '84. It sat in legal limbo until this year when they finally auctioned it. But sometime between seizure and sale, someone came back, built this facility, started using it again. Vincent. Hank's voice carried the certainty of someone connecting dots they'd been avoiding. Lorenzo Ruggiero's grandson. Word around the neighborhood is he's been buying up old family properties through shell companies, trying to rebuild what the feds tore down. But he couldn't buy this house. Too much federal oversight, too much history. So he used it anyway, figuring no one would check an abandoned crime scene. The logic was sound and horrifying. Hide criminal activity in the last place anyone would look. The scene of previous crimes, already investigated and cleared and forgotten. Use the city's decay as cover. Count on urban abandonment to provide perfect camouflage. Lily's been down here 3 months. Stone's hands curled into fists. That's 87 days by the marks on the wall. 3 months that no one noticed a child missing. 3 months that Vincent, or whoever works for him, kept her locked in darkness. Hank's face aged a decade in the phone's harsh light. You know what the Ruggieros did back in the day. Human trafficking. Kids taken from vulnerable situations. Broken down. Used up. Lorenzo got life in federal prison. Died there in '93. I thought that closed the book. Apparently, the next generation just learned to be more careful. They climbed back up to the ground floor. Stone's mind was already working through implications. Lily needed protection the FBI might not provide if they didn't understand the scope of what they'd stumbled into. He needed information, leverage, some way to prove that rescuing her hadn't been kidnapping. I'm going to fix this place. The words emerged before conscious thought caught up with intention. Make it livable, safe. So when they release Lily, and they will release her, because I didn't do anything wrong, she has somewhere better than a group home or whatever holding cell the system provides. Hank studied him with the expression of someone recalculating initial assessments. You planning to apply for guardianship of a kid you met 6 hours ago? I'm planning to keep a promise. She asked me not to let them take her back. I said I wouldn't. That means making sure back is somewhere worth being. The old man nodded slowly, decision crystallizing. Then we start tomorrow. I'll bring tools. You provide muscle. Between us, we can get the ground floor habitable in a week if we work steady. He paused at the door, turned back. But understand something. You're making yourself a target. Vincent wants that girl for a reason. You stand between him and what he wants. You're asking for violence the law can't prevent. Stone had spent 20 years dancing with violence in various forms. It held no mystery for him anymore, just the familiar weight of calculated risk. Let him come. I've handled worse than spoiled criminals playing at Dynasty Restoration. Hank left with a promise to return at dawn. Stone secured the front door as best he could with its damaged frame, then descended once more to the basement. The cell where he'd found Lily felt different now. Not just a prison, but evidence of ongoing atrocity, proof that evil didn't die when authorities declared victory. He photographed everything with his phone. The tally marks on the wall, the stained mattress, the industrial lock mechanism, the tunnel leading deeper into earth and darkness, documentation for future need, insurance against being dismissed as unreliable witness. Climbing back to the ground floor, exhaustion finally caught up with the day's accumulated stress. Stone collapsed onto a sleeping bag and tried to find rest that wouldn't come, too aware of the house's violated state, in his own precarious position in a conflict he barely understood. Sleep arrived eventually, thin and unsatisfying, fractured by dreams of Lily's terrified face and Sarah's dying request to live for something beyond survival. Dawn broke gray and cold. Stone woke to find Hank's pickup already parked outside, the truck bed loaded with enough carpentry equipment to suggest serious intention. The old man emerged carrying coffee in a thermos and the kind of determination that came from deciding a thing needed doing regardless of personal cost. Thought you might appreciate this. Hank poured coffee into 2 ancient mugs. First rule of renovation: start with caffeine, proceed with caution. They began in the library, the room least damaged by the previous night's search. Hank directed while Stone hauled, clearing debris, sorting salvageable books from those too far gone, stabilizing the leaning shelves that threatened collapse. The physical labor felt good after 3 years of minimal exertion, muscles remembering what they'd been built for. Around mid-morning, Stone's phone buzzed. Martinez. Lily's asking for you, not demanding, just asking. Thought you should know she's physically healthy, no signs of sexual abuse, severe malnutrition and dehydration being treated. Psychologically, the message trailed off into dots that said more than words. She won't talk to our counselors, won't talk to anyone, just sits and stares and occasionally whispers your name. Stone typed back. Can I see her? Not yet. Legal is still figuring out your status, but I'm starting to think we made a mistake yesterday. It wasn't an apology, but coming from federal law enforcement, it qualified as admission of error. Stone pocketed the phone and returned to work, channeling frustration into productive destruction of 40 years accumulated rot. By noon, they'd cleared the library enough to reveal what the searchers had been after. A section of wall behind the bookcases showed different construction from the surrounding plaster. Hank tapped it with his knuckles, producing hollow echoes. False wall, common trick in houses this old, usually hiding safes or valuable papers the family didn't trust to banks. They pulled the remaining shelves away, exposing the full extent of the construction. Someone had bricked up what might have been a doorway or alcove, then plastered over to match the existing walls. The work was old, but not original. Stone could see where new mortar met old, creating visible seams. We opening it? Hank already had a pry bar in hand. Stone nodded. Whatever the searchers wanted, it was connected to Lily. Finding it first meant having leverage, information, some tool to protect her beyond good intentions. The plaster came away in chunks, exposing brick underneath. Hank worked systematically, removing enough to create an opening while minimizing structural damage. Behind the brick, a hollow space perhaps 3 feet deep emerged, and within that space, documents. Dozens of folders, notebooks, loose papers, all wrapped in waterproof plastic that had preserved them through decades of neglect. Stone pulled everything out carefully, spreading the haul across the cleared library floor. Hank whistled low. Someone wanted this hidden from the FBI. After the raid, before the house went fully abandoned, someone came back and walled this up. The topmost folder contained ledgers, financial records tracking transactions in clinical detail. Names, dates, amounts, all coded but clearly representing something illegal given the care taken to conceal them. Beneath that, photographs. Dozens of children, all appearing distressed or drugged or both, all bearing dates from the 70s and early 80s. Stone's stomach turned, but he forced himself to look, to document, to understand the scope of what Lorenzo Ruggiero had built. This was evidence the FBI had missed, preserved by someone who either wanted insurance or planned to resume operations once the heat died down. At the bottom of the pile, a leather-bound journal. The cover showed embossed initials. E.R. Stone opened it, found handwriting flowing and feminine, pages dated from 1982 through 1984. Diary of Elena Ruggiero, the first entry began. Stone flipped through, scanning entries that detailed daily life in a crime family. Mundane observations mixed with growing horror as Elena documented things she'd seen, things she'd been forced to ignore, things that apparently eventually broke through whatever conditioning had normalized them. The early entries documented daily life in the crime family, mundane observations that gradually gave way to horror as Elena recorded things she witnessed, things she was forced to ignore. Stone flipped through quickly, looking for anything relevant to Lily. An entry dated October 1984 stopped him cold. The FBI raided today. Chaos everywhere. Agents shouting. Father screaming. My brother's trying to destroy evidence. I'm 18 and pregnant with his child. Lorenzo's child? The circumstances of conception are something I can never write, can never speak. In the confusion, I slipped out the back. No one noticed. They were too busy saving themselves. I have maybe hours before someone realizes I'm gone. I'm taking the tunnel, leaving Detroit forever. If this baby survives, if I survive, I'll disappear completely. The family can never know. Stone turned pages, finding years of blank space, then new entries beginning in 2013. The handwriting older, shakier. 30 years of hiding. 30 years of looking over my shoulder. I changed my name, moved to Portland, worked jobs that didn't ask questions. The family never found me. I thought I was safe. Then the diagnosis, stage 4. The doctors give me a year, maybe less, and I'm pregnant. At 48, after a lifetime alone, I'm finally having the child I couldn't have at 18. Entry dated March 2014. I gave birth today, a daughter. I've named her Lily. She's perfect. Dark hair, tiny fingers, completely innocent of the poison in her veins. But I'm dying, 6 months, maybe less now. The cancer is everywhere. I've made arrangements. When I'm gone, she'll be placed with Children's Services in Michigan. No name, no history, just abandoned infant. It's the only way to keep her hidden. Vincent is Lorenzo's grandson. I've tracked the family from afar all these years. He's building something. If he ever learns Lily exists, if he ever discovers she's Lorenzo's granddaughter, he'll use her. Better she grows up believing she's nobody than becomes a symbol for that evil. Final entry, June 2014. I have weeks left. Lily is 3 months old. Tomorrow I take her to Detroit, leave her where she'll be found and cared for. The family is there, but they don't know about her, and I've been careful. New name, no records tying me to Elena Ruggiero. My daughter will never know her mother, her grandfather, the legacy she inherited. This is mercy. This is love. This is the only way I can save her from what I ran from 30 years ago. The diary ended. Stone's hands trembled, making the old paper rustle. Lily, the girl in the basement, wasn't some random victim. She was Elena's daughter, born 30 years after the FBI raid, after Elena escaped and lived in hiding. The girl you found. Hank had been reading over his shoulder. She's Elena's daughter, born 2014, which makes her 10 now. Elena must have died right after leaving her with Children's Services. Vincent somehow found records, tracked Lily down, figured out who she was. He paused, calculation in his weathered eyes. She's not just family. She's Lorenzo Ruggiero's granddaughter. Direct bloodline. That's why Vincent wants her. Proof of lineage, living symbol to legitimize whatever empire he's rebuilding. Stone stared at the final entry, at Elena's desperate handwriting describing a mother's last act of protection. The implications crashed over him. Lily hadn't been hidden for 40 years. She'd been hidden for 10. Living a normal life in foster care, never knowing her heritage, until Vincent's investigation uncovered the truth. Elena had bought her daughter a decade of safety, then Vincent had stolen it. I found something, Elena Ruggiero's diary, evidence hidden in the house since the '84 raid, and it explains everything about Lily. Silence stretched across the connection while Martinez processed implications. Where are you? The house. I've been clearing debris. There was a false wall in the library. Everything was hidden behind it. Financial records, photographs, Elena's personal journal covering 1982 through 2014. Elena escaped during the FBI raid in 1984, lived in hiding for 30 years under a false name, had a daughter in 2014, Lily. Elena died of cancer months later, left Lily with Children's Services as abandoned to protect her from the family. And you think the girl you found is that daughter? I think Vincent tracked down Elena's records somehow, discovered Lily existed, figured out she was Lorenzo Ruggiero's granddaughter. Direct bloodline. Perfect symbol for legitimizing whatever empire he's trying to rebuild. He grabbed her from foster care, locked her in the basement to educate her about her heritage. Lily's not just a victim, she's the last living heir. Another pause, longer this time. Don't move anything else. I'm sending a team to collect the evidence. And Dalton, if you're right about this, if she really is Elena's daughter, that changes her legal status. She's not just an abused child, she's an heir to seized criminal assets. That brings complications. The call ended. Stone stared at the diary in his hands, at the desperate words of a mother trying to save her daughter from inherited damnation, and wondered if Elena's sacrifice had bought 40 years of safety or merely delayed the inevitable. Hank cleared his throat. We should probably secure this place before the FBI arrives. Don't want evidence walking away. They spent the next hour photographing and cataloging, creating redundant documentation in case official channels develop convenient memory problems. By the time Martinez arrived with her team, Stone had encrypted backups saved to cloud storage and physical copies hidden in the Harley saddlebags. Martinez walked through the library, examining the exposed hollow and its scattered contents with the expression of someone recalculating career decisions. How did we miss this? We had the house for 20 years before auction. Multiple evidence sweeps. How did no one find a false wall? Hank offered the answer Stone was too tactful to voice. Because you cleared it as crime scene and moved on. No one was looking for hidden rooms in a house already emptied of active evidence. Easy to miss what you're not searching for. The FBI team worked with efficient precision, bagging and tagging, creating chain of custody documentation that would hold up in court. Martinez pulled Stone aside while they worked. I owe you an apology. Yesterday we treated you like a suspect when you were the only person trying to help that girl. That was wrong. Where is she now? Protective custody, juvenile facility on the east side. Still not talking, still asking for you. I spoke with my supervisor. We're prepared to authorize supervised visitation if you're willing. She needs stability, familiar faces. You're the closest thing she has to either. Stone's throat tightened around words that wanted to emerge but couldn't find proper shape. He settled for, when? Tomorrow, I'll arrange transport, be there myself to supervise. Meanwhile, Martinez gestured at the house. Whatever you're doing here, fixing it up or whatever, that's probably good. She'll need somewhere to go once we sort out the legal tangles. Foster care is overwhelmed, and given her unique situation, keeping her in the system might actually put her at more risk than placing her with someone invested in her safety. After the FBI left with their evidence haul, Stone and Hank returned to renovation work with renewed purpose. They cleared the dining room next, hauling out rotted furniture and stripping water-damaged wallpaper to expose walls that could be repainted. The physical transformation felt symbolic, taking a space built for suffering and remaking it into something livable. Dusk arrived too quickly. Hank packed his tools, promised to return in the morning with paint supplies and better lighting. Stone was securing windows against the coming night when headlights swept across the front of the house. Not a single vehicle, but three. Black Cadillac Escalades, the kind of ostentatious display that said money without taste, power without subtlety. They parked in formation, blocking the street, and disgorged men in suits that probably cost more than Stone's Harley. Vincent Ruggiero emerged from the center vehicle, immaculate in tailored darkness, moving with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to owning whatever space he occupied. 5 others flanked him, their bulk and bearing suggesting hired muscle dressed up as business associates. Stone stepped onto the porch, phone in his pocket recording audio, knife loose in a jacket pocket he could reach quickly if need demanded. Vincent stopped at the property line, smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Marcus Dalton, I heard you had an interesting first night. Found something that didn't belong to you, I'm told. If you're talking about Lily, she's with the FB, safe, protected, somewhere you can't reach." Vincent's laugh carried the warmth of a foreclosure notice. "Protected? From what? I'm her family, Marcus, her great uncle if we're being specific about bloodlines. My grandfather Lorenzo was Elena's father, which makes me and Lily connected by bonds deeper than whatever hero fantasy you're nursing. Family that locked her in a basement for 3 months. That's not protection, that's imprisonment. Correction, we were keeping her safe while she adjusted to her heritage. Lily spent her whole life believing she's nobody special, just another foster kid in a system that doesn't care. We were educating her about her true identity, her value, her place in a legacy that stretches back generations." Vincent ascended the porch steps uninvited. "But you interrupted that process. Took something precious and handed it to authorities who'll bury her in bureaucracy and mediocrity. I'm here to negotiate her return." Stone's body shifted into combat stance without conscious command. Weight balanced, hands ready, assessing angles and threat potential. "There's nothing to negotiate. Lily's not property. She's a child who deserves better than being used as a symbol for your criminal rehabilitation project." Vincent's expression hardened, the pretense of civility evaporating. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. The Ruggiero name still carries weight in this city. People remember. People respect. With Lily as our legitimate heir, as proof that the bloodline survived despite federal persecution, we can reclaim what was stolen, rebuild what was destroyed. You're standing between us and resurrection." "Then I'm standing in the right place." Vincent snapped his fingers. 2 of his men moved faster than their bulk suggested possible, closing distance before Stone could react. The first one's punch connected with his ribs, a professional blow that knew exactly where to land for maximum impact. Pain exploded across Stone's left side. Something cracked, maybe broke, definitely damaged. He twisted away from the second attacker, pulled the knife, slashed without precision but with enough threat to create space. The blade caught fabric, missed flesh, but bought him seconds to reassess. 2 on 1, both trained, both younger and probably better rested. The math wasn't good. Stone drove his shoulder into the nearest man's chest, using forward momentum to unbalance him. They went down together onto the porch boards, and Stone got his knife hand-free long enough to press the blade against the man's throat. "Call them off." Vincent watched with detached interest. "No, you're proving my point. You're a fighter, not a guardian. Lily needs family, not some broken soldier playing protector." The second attacker kicked Stone's knee from behind. The leg buckled, dumping him sideways, and the knife clattered away across weathered wood. Hands grabbed his jacket, hauled him upright, slammed him against the door frame, hard enough that his vision blurred. Someone's fist connected with his stomach, driving air from lungs in a rush that left him gasping. Through the pain haze, Stone heard Hank's voice from the street. "Detroit PD is on the way. I called them soon as you showed up, Vincent. This whole thing's being recorded." The assault stopped immediately. Vincent's men released Stone, stepped back with the synchronized precision of people following unspoken commands. Stone slumped against the door, tasting blood, fighting to stay vertical through the stabbing agony in his ribs. Vincent descended the porch steps, composure reassembled. This isn't over, Marcus. You can't protect her. The system can't protect her. Eventually, she comes back to family because family is the only constant when everything else fails. The Escalades departed as dramatically as they had arrived, leaving Stone bleeding on his own porch, while distant sirens announced law enforcement running late to yet another crisis. Hank hurried over, helped Stone inside to sit on cleared library floor. Jesus, you're hurt bad. Let me call an ambulance. No ambulance. Stone spat blood, probed his ribs with careful fingers, confirmed at least one fractured. Can't afford the medical bills, and I need to be mobile. Just tape me up. I've had worse. Hank disappeared to his truck, returned with a first aid kit that suggested experience with injuries requiring discretion. He worked efficiently, wrapping Stone's torso in compression bandages tight enough to stabilize the ribs without restricting breathing completely. The pain remained, sharp and immediate, but bearable. You can't fight Vincent alone. Hank's hands were steady despite his age. He's got money, muscle, political connections. This isn't some gang fight you can win through toughness. Stone's phone sat heavy in his pocket, containing a number he'd sworn never to call again. 3 years since Danny's funeral. 3 years since he'd walked away from the only brotherhood that had ever truly claimed him. 3 years of telling himself he was done with that life, that violence, that world. But Lily needed protection that one broken Marine couldn't provide. And there was one phone call that could shift the balance, bring force equal to what Vincent commanded. Summon allies who understood loyalty deeper than law. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact he'd never deleted, despite every reason to purge it. Cole Brennan, Hammer, the brothers called him. Southwest chapter president, the kind of Hells Angels leader who'd turned regional gang politics into strategic empire. The man who'd saved Stone's life twice and never asked for anything in return. Stone's thumb hovered over the call button, while every instinct screamed that making this connection meant abandoning whatever normal life he'd tried to build in Detroit. This was crossing a line, pulling old debts into present crisis, admitting he couldn't handle things alone. The alternative was leaving Lily vulnerable, letting Vincent win through superior resources, failing another promise to another person who'd trusted him with their safety. He pressed call. The phone rang twice before a voice like gravel in a cement mixer answered. This number's been dead for 3 years. Either someone stole a phone or Stone's finally ready to come home. Breathing hurt, speaking hurt worse. Stone forced the words out anyway. Cole, it's Stone, I need help. Silence stretched across the connection, heavy with years and distance and accumulated history. Where are you? Detroit, I found a kid, 9 years old, locked in a basement. Mafia family wants her back, wants to use her as symbol for rebuilding their organization. I can't protect her alone. They've got money and muscle, and I've got a fractured rib and good intentions. You asking the club to go to war for a kid you just met? Stone closed his eyes, thought of Lily's terrified face, her small arms wrapped around his neck, her whispered plea not to be abandoned. I'm asking my family to help me keep a promise. That kid trusted me. I told her I wouldn't let them take her. I need help making that true. Another pause, shorter this time. Give me the address. I'm calling a code black. Full chapter mobilization. We'll be there in 6 hours with everyone we can pull from surrounding states. And Stone, welcome back. The call ended. Stone lowered the phone, stared at it like the device itself had fundamentally altered reality through its transmission of electromagnetic signals. Hank watched with the expression of someone witnessing decisions with irreversible consequences. You just invited the Hells Angels to Detroit. That's not backup, that's escalation. Vincent wants to play family loyalty? Fine. Let's see how his hired muscle holds up against 600 bikers who actually understand what brotherhood means. Outside, Detroit wind carried the promise of coming winter. Inside the Ruggiero mansion, 2 men who'd found purpose in protecting someone else's child prepared for the war that protection would require. Stone's ribs throbbed with each breath, a metronome counting down to violence. But for the first time since Sarah died, Since Danny fell, since everything good in his life turned to ash and memory, he felt something other than empty survival. He felt like maybe fighting for someone else's future was the same thing as finding his own. Martinez arrived the next morning in an unmarked sedan, professional distance softened by something that might have been guilt. Stone waited on the porch, ribs taped tight enough that breathing felt like negotiating with pain, but mobile enough to function. The FBI agent studied him with the assessment of someone recalculating initial judgments. "You look like hell." Stone touched his split lip gingerly. "Vincent made a house call last night, wanted to negotiate Lily's return. I declined. We found his crew on traffic cameras, already issued warrants for assault." Martinez opened the passenger door. "But that's not why I'm here. Lily's been asking for you every hour. The counselors think seeing you might break through whatever wall she's built. You still want visitation?" The question barely needed answering. Stone lowered himself into the sedan with the careful movements of someone whose body had recent reasons to protest sudden shifts. They drove through Detroit morning traffic, past neighborhoods in various stages of surrender, until reaching a converted school building on the east side that served as temporary housing for displaced children. Inside smelled like institutional cleaning products, failing to mask institutional despair. Martinez signed them through security, led Stone down corridors painted colors meant to be cheerful but achieving only sadness by committee decision. Through observation windows, he glimpsed other children, some playing, some staring at walls, all wearing the universal expression of kids learning that adults couldn't be trusted to keep promises. The room they entered held Lily at a table scattered with untouched coloring books. She looked smaller than Stone remembered, more fragile, like 3 days in protective custody had somehow diminished her physical presence. Bruises on her arms showed where IV lines had delivered hydration and nutrients her body desperately needed. Then she saw him, her face transformed, terror replaced by recognition, shutdown replaced by desperate hope. She was across the room before Martinez could move to intercept, arms locked around Stone's waist with strength that belied her size. "You came back. They said you wouldn't. They said you were and I shouldn't trust you, but I knew they were wrong." Stone knelt despite his ribs' protests, met her at eye level. "I promised I wouldn't let them take you back. I keep my promises." Lily pulled back enough to study his face, small fingers reaching up to touch the bruise darkening his cheekbone. "Someone hurt you. Someone tried, they failed." He brushed hair from her eyes with the gentleness of someone unused to tender gestures but willing to learn. "Are they treating you okay here?" "The food's good, the bed's soft, but everyone keeps asking questions I don't want to answer. They want to know who took me, where I was before, why I won't tell them my real parents' names." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't remember my real parents. The people who had me said my mother was dead and my father never wanted me. They said the family would take care of me if I learned to be quiet and grateful and useful." Martinez had been watching from beside the door, professional detachment cracking around the edges. "Lily, we found evidence about your real mother. Her name was Elena Ruggiero. She escaped from a very bad family a long time ago, before you were born, and lived in hiding to stay safe. She had you in 2014, but she was very sick. She died when you were just a baby. Before she died, she made sure you'd be taken care of, kept away from the bad people she ran from. We think you're her daughter." Lily's grip on Stone tightened. "The men in suits said I was special because of my blood, that I belonged to the Ruggiero family and had to come back to where I was born. But I don't want to be special. I just want to be safe. You are safe." Stone's words carried the weight of personal oath. "And you're staying safe. Those men can't reach you here, and they definitely can't reach you once you're somewhere better." "Where's somewhere better?" "I'm fixing the house where I found you, making it into a place where kids who've been hurt can recover. Would you want to live there? With me?" Martinez's head snapped towards Stone, surprise evident despite professional training. Lily's eyes widened, searching his face for the lie she'd been conditioned to expect from adult promises. "You want me to live with you? Like a real family?" "Like a real family. If you want that, if the courts allow it, if..." She cut him off with another fierce hug, this one accompanied by the kind of crying that came from pressure finally finding release. Stone held her while she sobbed, aware of Martinez making notes, aware of cameras recording everything, aware that this moment would be dissected by lawyers and social workers and bureaucrats who measured love and documentation requirements. He didn't care. Lily needed someone to choose her, to want her despite complications, to see her as a child deserving protection rather than an asset worth exploiting. Stone had failed Sarah's dying request to find purpose. Here, holding a traumatized girl in a room that smelled like industrial kindness. He'd accidentally stumbled into redemption. The visitation lasted an hour. Stone and Lily colored together, her creating careful patterns, him producing stick figures that made her laugh. They talked about nothing important and everything essential. Favorite colors, whether dogs or cats were better, what kind of room she'd want in the mansion once it was finished. Normal conversations, the kind that built trust through accumulated small moments. When Martinez finally indicated time was up, Lily's face crumpled. Do you have to leave? For now, but I'll come back every day if they let me. And soon, very soon, you'll come home for real. She walked him to the door, hand in his, extracting another promise. You won't let them take me back to the dark place? Even if they say it's legal, or I belong there, or it's what's best. Stone crouched again, ignoring the stabbing protest from his ribs. I would fight everyone in this city before I let that happen. You have my word. In the sedan, Martinez drove in silence for several blocks before speaking. You know what you're signing up for? Legal battles, home studies, background checks. They'll dig into every aspect of your life. Your Marine service, your time with the Angels, every bad decision you've made. And even if you pass all that, Vincent will fight for custody. He's got lawyers, money, legitimate claim as blood relative. Let him fight. I've got something he doesn't. What's that? Lily's trust. Everything else we can figure out. Martinez pulled over 2 blocks from the Ruggiero mansion, engine idling while she formulated words carefully. The evidence you found, Elena's diary, the financial records, all of it, builds a case that Vincent's been using that house for ongoing criminal activity. If we can prove he's the one who imprisoned Lily, we can block his custody claim and probably send him to federal prison. But we need more. Elena's diary proves Lily's bloodline, which actually strengthens Vincent's legal position if we can't prove his crimes. Stone's phone buzzed. A text from Cole. Rolling in 4 hours, bringing the Midwest. Hope you've got beer. Behind the joke lay the weight of mobilization. Hundreds of bikers dropping everything to ride hundreds of miles because one of their own had called for help. What if I could get Vincent to confess? Stone watched Martinez's expression shift toward interest. He thinks he's untouchable. Men like that love explaining how clever they've been. Give him an audience and enough rope, he'll hang himself. You're talking about wearing a wire. That's dangerous, especially after he already assaulted you. He's coming back anyway. The search yesterday, the beating last night, those were warnings. Next time he'll bring overwhelming force, and someone's going to get killed. Better to control when and where the confrontation happens. Martinez studied him with the look of someone calculating acceptable risk versus potential payoff. I can't officially authorize you to put yourself in danger. But if you happen to be recording when Vincent showed up to make threats, and if that recording happened to be admissible in court, it would solve several problems. She handed him a device no larger than a shirt button. Battery life about 6 hours, records to cloud storage in real time, so even if he finds it and destroys it, we'll have the file. Press the center to activate. Don't do anything stupid. We want confession, not martyrdom. The sedan dropped him at the mansion. Hank was already there, truck bed loaded with paint cans and drop cloths, working on transforming the library from crime scene to something approaching livable. The old man took one look at Stone's face and the way he moved and shook his head. You're about to do something that'll make me regret helping you, aren't you? Vincent's coming. Tonight probably, with enough men to overwhelm any resistance I could offer alone. But I've got help arriving, and I've got a plan to make him confess everything while the FBI records it. Your help being the Hells Angels. Your plan being putting yourself in the line of fire and hoping everyone arrives before you're dead. Hank set down his paintbrush. I was a cop for 3 decades. Know how many times I saw civilians playing hero? Know how many of them survived it? I'm not a civilian. I'm a Marine who spent 7 years in war zones and another decade with people who treated violence as a second language. Vincent's dangerous, but he's also predictable. Men like him follow scripts. I just need to know my lines. They worked through the afternoon in tense silence, completing the library's transformation. Fresh paint covered water stains. Repaired shelves held books salvaged from 4 decades of rot. The space where Elena's hidden cache had been now showed filled plaster, sanded smooth, ready for finish work. By evening, the room looked almost habitable, a monument to what applied effort could accomplish against entropy. Dusk settled over Indian Village with October's premature darkness. Hank gathered his tools, stopped at the door. Whatever happens tonight, you've already done more for that girl than the system ever would. Sometimes that has to be enough, even when it isn't. After he left, Stone activated the recording device Martinez had provided, felt its slight weight against his chest like a second heartbeat. His phone showed text updates from Cole, clubs mobilizing across Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, estimated arrival time creeping closer with each message. The mathematics were simple. Survive until reinforcements arrived. Get Vincent talking. Let justice finally catch up with men who'd hidden behind family names and legal technicalities for generations. Full dark brought the rumble of expensive engines. Stone watched from the second floor as vehicles assembled. Not 3 Escalades this time, but 15, forming a motorcade that announced Vincent's intentions with ostentatious clarity. They parked in formation, blocking every exit, trapping Stone inside his own property. Vincent emerged in a suit that probably cost more than most Detroit families earned in months. Behind him, 30 men formed ranks, some in business attire, others making no attempt to hide their muscle-for-hire status. They moved with synchronized precision, a private army assembled through money and the kind of connections that survived federal prosecution. Stone descended to the porch, empty hands visible, recording device capturing every sound. Vincent smiled with all the warmth of a tax audit. Marcus Dalton, still here, still pretending you can protect what doesn't belong to you. Lily's not property. She's a child who deserves better than being a symbol for your empire restoration project. Empire? Vincent ascended the steps, getting close enough that Stone could smell expensive cologne, and underneath it, the sweat of someone working harder than they pretended. We're not building empires, we're reclaiming heritage. My grandfather Lorenzo built something magnificent before federal persecution destroyed it. With Lily as our rightful heir, we can restore what was stolen. By imprisoning a 9-year-old in a basement for 3 months, that's restoration? Vincent's expression flickered, annoyance that his carefully constructed narrative was being challenged. We were educating her, teaching her about her bloodline, her value, her role in something greater than individual happiness. She would have thanked us eventually, once she understood the privilege we were offering. The privilege of being locked in darkness? Stone kept his voice level, conversational, giving Vincent room to explain himself into federal charges. Of being starved and isolated until she broke? That's what you call education? It's what every Ruggiero endures, the breaking down before building up. My grandfather did it. My father endured it. I survived it. Tradition isn't always comfortable, but it creates strength. Vincent gestured at his assembled force. And speaking of strength, I've brought enough to end this farce. You'll sign custody papers transferring guardianship rights, or my associates will make you sign them. Either way, Lily comes home to family. I'm not her legal guardian yet. I can't transfer rights I don't have. Then you'll convince the FBI that you made a mistake, that you misunderstood the situation, that Lily was never in danger from her loving family. Vincent pulled papers from his jacket. These are sworn affidavits from 4 people claiming they saw you snatch a child from a city park. With those testimonies and your Hells Angels background, you'll be lucky to avoid prison, much less gain custody. The papers were forgeries. Had to be, since Stone had never snatched anyone. But with enough money, witnesses could be bought, evidence manufactured, truth bent until it resembled whatever shape wealth required. Vincent was offering a choice between accepting defeat or being destroyed by legal machinery that served the highest bidder. Before Stone could respond, a sound rose from the distant streets, low at first, barely distinguishable from traffic noise, then growing into something that made the ground vibrate. Engines, dozens of them, hundreds. The distinctive growl of Harley-Davidson motorcycles ridden in formation by people who'd learned to move as unified force. Vincent's head turned toward the sound, calculation in his eyes shifting toward uncertainty. His men stirred, hands moving toward weapons concealed under suit jackets. The noise grew louder, closer, until it wasn't just sound but physical presence, the accumulated thunder of an army on wheels. The first bikes appeared at the end of the street, headlights cutting through darkness, riders in leather cuts bearing the Hells Angels' death's head. They came in waves, filling the road, spilling onto sidewalks, surrounding Vincent's motorcade like floodwater, finding every available space. 10 bikes became 20, became 50, became hundreds, until Indian Village transformed into a sea of chrome and leather and controlled violence waiting for excuse. Stone watched Vincent's face cycle through emotions. Confusion, anger, fear carefully masked behind businessman composure. The mafia lieutenant had brought 30 men. Cole had brought an army. The bikes kept coming. Michigan clubs Stone recognized from old gatherings. Ohio brothers he'd ridden with years ago. Wisconsin, and Illinois. Indiana chapters whose presidents Cole must have called in favors to mobilize. The street filled completely, then the surrounding blocks, until the rumble of idling engines became constant background roar that made conversation impossible without shouting. Finally, from the center of the formation, a rider emerged, tall even on the bike, long gray hair pulled back, leather cut showing patches from 3 decades of service. Cole Brennan dismounted with the deliberate movements of someone who'd ridden 500 miles without stopping and wasn't about to let exhaustion show weakness. He walked toward the mansion, and the assembled bikers fell silent in deference that wasn't about fear, but respect earned through years of leadership. Even Vincent's private army seemed to shrink, their expensive suits and concealed weapons suddenly inadequate against the visual weight of 600 men who'd chosen brotherhood over every safer option. Cole stopped at the property line, studied Vincent with the assessment of someone measuring an opponent's worth. "You Vincent Ruggiero, the man threatening my brother?" Vincent recovered his composure with visible effort. "Your brother broke into my family's property and kidnapped a child. I'm simply retrieving what belongs to us. That child belongs to nobody but herself, and Stone here didn't kidnap anyone. He rescued a kid from a basement prison your family built." Cole's voice carried across the street, ensuring everyone heard. "So here's what's happening. You're leaving. You're dropping any custody claims. You're forgetting Lily's name. And if you ever threaten her or Stone again, you'll answer to every brother here and every brother they can call. This is a legal matter. This is a justice matter. Law failed that girl when it let you imprison her. Law failed Stone when it arrested him for doing the right thing. So now justice handles what law couldn't." Cole stepped closer, and despite Vincent being surrounded by his men, it was the mafia lieutenant who looked isolated. "Take your people and leave while you still can." Vincent's hand moved toward his jacket, a gesture that could have been reaching for a phone, could have been signaling his men, could have been the start of violence that would end badly for everyone. But before he could complete the motion, sirens cut through the engine noise. FBI vehicles, 10 of them, arriving with timing that suggested coordination rather than coincidence. Martinez emerged from the lead SUV, bullhorn in hand. "Vincent Ruggiero, you're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment of a minor, conspiracy to commit federal crimes, and about 15 other charges based on recordings made earlier tonight." Stone's hand went to the recording device against his chest. Vincent followed the motion, understanding flooding his face as he realized he'd confessed everything while being documented. His composure finally cracked. "You set me up. This whole thing was a trap. You set yourself up." Martinez signaled her team. "You came here with an army to threaten a witness and extract illegal custody of a child you'd imprisoned. We just gave you enough rope." The arrest happened with surprising efficiency. FBI agents moving through Vincent's assembled force, separating leaders from followers, cuffing those who mattered while taking names from those who didn't. Vincent's expensive suit couldn't protect him from federal charges backed by recorded confession and decades of evidence finally being taken seriously. As they loaded him into a vehicle, he turned back toward Stone. She'll never be normal. Ruggiero blood doesn't allow normal. She'll grow up wondering who she could have been if you'd let her embrace her heritage. Stone met his eyes with the certainty of someone who'd found purpose in protecting rather than destroying. She'll grow up safe. That's better than whatever heritage you were selling. The FBI vehicles departed, taking Vincent and his aspirations of dynasty restoration into the judicial machinery that had failed 40 years ago, but might finally deliver consequences. Cole watched them go, then turned to Stone. So, you gonna tell me what possessed you to buy a haunted murder house and immediately find a kid in the basement? Long story, most of it bad luck and worse timing. My favorite kind. Cole surveyed the assembled bikers. Well, we're here now. What do you need? Stone looked at the mansion. Damaged but salvageable, tainted by history but capable of holding better futures. An idea had been forming since he'd promised Lily a real home, taking shape through conversations with Hank and Martinez's cautious optimism about custody. I'm turning this place into a haven for kids like Lily. Children who've been hurt, who need somewhere safe to recover. But it needs work. A lot of work. Cole's expression shifted towards something that might have been approval. How much work we talking? Roof repair, structural reinforcement, interior renovation, building a playground out back. Basically everything except burning it down and starting over. Brothers, Cole's voice carried across the street. We've got a project. This house is becoming a shelter for kids. Anyone with construction skills, you're volunteered. Everyone else, you're volunteering anyway. We've got 2 weeks before most of us need to get back. Let's see what we can build. The response was immediate. Bikers dismounting, forming groups, pulling tools from saddlebags that apparently came standard with carpentry equipment. Within an hour, work lights illuminated the mansion's exterior, power tools screamed against wood and metal, and the coordinated chaos of people who'd built clubhouses and fought wars applied those skills to constructive purpose. Hank arrived at dawn, took one look at the organized demolition and renovation happening simultaneously, and just started laughing. You called in the Hells Angels to do carpentry. I've seen everything now. Stone, exhausted and riding high on adrenaline and pain medication Hank had insisted he take, gestured at the house. They're good at following orders and working as a unit. Turns out those skills transfer to construction. Over the next 2 weeks, Indian Village witnessed a transformation that no government program could have matched. The mansion's roof was stripped to bare rafters, then rebuilt with materials Cole somehow procured at wholesale prices through connections no one asked about. Every broken window was replaced. The rotting balcony was torn down and reconstructed to code that exceeded city requirements. Inside, walls received fresh drywall, floors were sanded and refinished, and rooms were painted in colors chosen by committee consensus. The tainted basement was converted into storage and mechanical space, the cells demolished, the interrogation chair destroyed with the kind of enthusiasm that came from people who'd seen enough suffering. Only the tunnel remained, sealed with concrete and marked with a plaque. History preserved, never repeated. Outside, a playground emerged from the dead lawn, swings and slides and sandbox, all built to commercial safety standards by bikers who called their grandkids for advice on what children actually liked. Trees were planted, grass was seeded, lights were installed that would make the darkness retreat into memory. We've been processing the evidence from Elena's diary. DNA testing confirms Lily is Elena's daughter. Blood work shows Lorenzo Ruggiero as Elena's father, making Lily his granddaughter, not daughter. Elena's diary documents that she was 18 when she escaped in 1984, pregnant from circumstances she couldn't write about. She lived in hiding for 30 years, had Lily in 2014, died of cancer shortly after. That complicates Lily's heritage but simplifies your custody case. Vincent's claim as great-uncle is tainted by his crimes, and no other legitimate relatives are stepping forward now that the full history is documented. How's she doing? Better, talking more, eating without prompting, sleeping through the night occasionally. The counselors say she's ready for placement and given everything. Martinez pulled papers from her briefcase. Family court is expediting your guardianship petition. Background check came back clean. Marine service with honors. Hells Angels membership noted, but no criminal record. Steady employment until recently. They want a home study, which I'm guessing will go well given you've converted a condemned mansion into a functioning youth shelter. I haven't done anything. The brothers did this. You asked for help. You gave people purpose. You took responsibility for the child who wasn't yours because it was the right thing to do. Martinez set the papers on a table. Family court judge wants to meet you and Lily together. See if the placement makes sense. If it goes well, you could have custody within a month. Stone's hands trembled slightly, holding documents that represented the difference between promise and reality. What do I do? I've never been a parent. Barely kept myself alive the last 3 years. You do what you've been doing. Show up, keep promises, protect her from people who see her as tool instead of child. Martinez headed for the door, paused. For what it's worth, I misjudged you. Thought you were another trauma case waiting to explode. Turns out you're just someone trying to do better than yesterday. The home study happened 3 days later. A social worker who walked through the mansion taking notes, interviewing the bikers still working, asking Hank about Stone's character. She seemed surprised by the cleanliness, the organization, the community support visible in every renovated space. Her final question came while they stood in the room Stone had prepared for Lily, painted soft blue, furnished with bed and desk and shelves waiting for whatever interests she'd develop. Why are you doing this? Really? Most people wouldn't take on responsibility for a traumatized child with complicated history. Stone thought about Sarah's dying request, about Danny falling in that Bakersfield parking lot, about 3 years of surviving without living, of existing without purpose, of days bleeding together in gray uniformity, about Lily's small arms wrapped around his neck and her whispered plea not to be abandoned. Because every darkness fears good people walking into it. I walked into that basement. I found her. I'm not walking away. The social worker wrote something in her notebook. Expression unreadable. I'll recommend approval. The judge will make final determination. Court day arrived with October giving way to November. Cold rain making Detroit streets shine like fresh wounds. Stone wore the one suit he owned, borrowed from Cole since they were roughly the same size. Lily appeared in a dress someone from social services had bought, looking fragile and terrified until she saw Stone and ran to him with the desperation of someone who'd learned that adults disappeared if you didn't hold tight enough. The judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes that suggested she'd presided over too many failures, reviewed the case file while Stone and Lily sat in chairs designed for people significantly shorter. Mr. Dalton, you understand what you are requesting? Legal guardianship means full responsibility. Financial support, medical decisions, education, everything a parent handles. Miss Chen has significant trauma history that will require ongoing therapy, patience, and resources you may not possess. Stone's throat was dry, but the words came clearly. I understand, and I'm ready. She deserves someone who chooses her, who sees her as a child worth protecting rather than an asset worth exploiting. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise I'll try every day to be what she needs. The judge looked at Lily. What do you want, young lady? Lily's small voice carried across the courtroom. I want to stay with Marcus. He keeps promises. He makes me feel safe. I don't want to go anywhere else. The judge made notes, reviewed documents, looked between Stone and Lily with calculation that seemed to weigh futures against risks. I'm granting temporary guardianship for 6 months, subject to monthly reviews. If Mr. Dalton proves capable and Miss Chen continues to thrive, we'll make it permanent. But understand, any signs of abuse, neglect, or that this placement harms rather than helps, and she'll be removed immediately. Relief hit Stone like physical force. Lily squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. Outside the courthouse, Martinez waited with what might have been a smile. Congratulations, you're officially a father figure. Temporary father figure. They all start temporary. The permanent part comes from showing up. The Ruggiero Mansion, Haven House, now officially registered as a nonprofit youth shelter, held its opening ceremony on the first day of December. The mayor attended, making a speech about Detroit rising from ashes and citizens taking responsibility for vulnerable populations. Local news covered it. Neighbors who'd avoided the property for 40 years brought donations, clothes, toys, books, everything children might need. Cole and the brothers departed gradually, heading back to their own chapters, their own lives, their own problems that didn't involve rehabilitating mafia mansions. But before leaving, Cole pulled Stone aside. "You did good work here. Danny would be proud. Sarah too. I just kept a promise. That's all any of us can do. Keep promises, show up, try to leave things better than we found them." Cole mounted his Harley, kick-started the engine. "You need us again, you call. Family doesn't have expiration dates." The first month of guardianship tested every assumption Stone had made about capability. Lily woke screaming from nightmares 3 times a week. She refused to eat anything that reminded her of basement captivity. She flinched at loud noises, male voices, closed doors. Progress came in increments so small they barely registered. Sleeping through one night, trying a new food, laughing at something stupid Stone said. Therapy helped. Dr. Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, worked with Lily twice weekly, teaching her that fear was normal but didn't have to be permanent. Stone attended sessions, learning techniques for handling flashbacks and triggers in the 1,000 ways trauma embedded itself in developing brains. Hank became a permanent fixture, teaching Lily carpentry and patience in equal measure. Other children began arriving, referrals from social services, kids who needed temporary shelter while family situations stabilized. Haven House grew from idea into functioning reality, staff hired, programs developed, lives slowly mending in spaces where suffering had once been architecture. A year passed in the kind of blur that comes from days filled with purpose. Lily turned 10, celebrated with a party that drew neighbors and bikers and social workers who'd become invested in her recovery. She'd gained weight, lost the haunted look, started sleeping through most nights. She called Stone Dad now, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. On the anniversary of the day he'd bought the mansion for $100, Stone stood on the porch watching Lily play soccer with other Haven House residents. The playground rang with laughter. The house glowed with light from every window. Indian Village looked different somehow, still struggling, still scarred by decades of decline, but no longer quite as hopeless. Martinez pulled up in her sedan, approached with the expression of someone bearing news. Vincent Ruggiero was sentenced today. 40 years federal prison, no possibility of parole. Between your recording, Elena's diary, and evidence we found in other properties he controlled, the prosecutor built a case that couldn't be plea bargained down. Lily know? Not yet. Thought you'd want to tell her yourself. Let her know the man who locked her away can't reach her anymore. That evening, after other children had gone to bed, Stone and Lily sat on the porch swing Hank had built. November wind carried the promise of first snow, but bundled in jackets they were warm enough. Remember Vincent, the man who kept you in the basement? Lily tensed but didn't pull away. I try not to. You don't have to anymore. He's in prison, for longer than you'll be a child. He can't hurt you or anyone else. She absorbed this silently, processing in the way that trauma survivors did, testing the information for lies, for threats, for the ways adults sometimes offered comfort that turned into new betrayals. Are you sure? I'm sure. The FBI promised. The judge promised. And I promise you're safe now, really safe. Not temporary safe. Not safe until something bad happens. Just safe. Lily leaned against him, small warmth in the cooling evening. I'm glad you found me. I'm glad you kept your promise. I'm glad I get to be your daughter. Stone's throat tightened around words that had been building for a year. I'm glad too. You saved my life, you know. I was just surviving before, going through motions. You gave me a reason to actually live again. They sat in comfortable silence while Detroit settled into darkness. Inside Haven House, other rescued children slept in beds that didn't lock from the outside, in rooms with windows that let in light, in a space that had been transformed from monument to suffering into shelter from it. Every darkness fears good people walking into it. Stone had said that to the social worker, and it had sounded like philosophy. Now it felt like truth. He'd walked into a basement expecting nothing but historical crime and found a child who needed saving. In saving her, he'd somehow saved himself. Lily's breathing had gone soft and regular, sleep claiming her in the way that children slept when they felt truly safe. Stone carried her inside, tucked her into bed, watched her for a moment in the nightlight's glow. Then he descended to the first floor, where Hank was finishing late repairs in the dining room. She sleeping? Like the dead. The good kind of sleeping, I mean. The peaceful kind. Hank set down his hammer, surveyed their work with satisfaction. We did all right here, didn't we? Took something poisoned and made it medicine. We did better than all right. We gave kids like Lily a place to heal. Outside, Detroit wind howled through streets that had seen too many endings and not enough beginnings. Inside Haven House, 23 children slept safely. In the master bedroom, Stone lay down without checking locks or securing exits or maintaining the hypervigilance that had defined 3 years of empty survival. For the first time since Sarah died, since Danny fell, since everything good turned to memory, he slept without fighting it. And in that sleep, no nightmares came. Just dreams of futures that might actually arrive, of promises kept, of darkness held back by people who refused to let it win. The mansion that everyone said would swallow him whole had instead taught him to stand upright. The girl everyone said would destroy him had instead shown him how to build. The brothers everyone said would drag him backward had instead pushed him forward. And somewhere in federal prison, Vincent Ruggiero learned that heritage without humanity was just another word for dynasty built on bones. While in Detroit, in a renovated mansion full of rescued children, the last Ruggiero heir learned that family wasn't about bloodlines. It was about who showed up, who kept promises, who chose you when they could have walked away. Stone had walked into darkness and brought light back out. That seemed like enough purpose for any life.
Aber Mitte hat halt keiner gespielt, ne? Ich bin hier einfach komplett durch, hab weder was gehört noch was gesehen.
Boah, ich würde mal einen Wallfake mit Drohne hier spüren. Dann geht einfach Main auf A. Oder Mitte oder so. Ich glaube, wenn wir hier mal die Wall setzen, die rotieren direkt.
Hältst du danach da,
Okay.
wenn Strohne?
Ja, renn einfach vor und Drohne.
Wir warten kurz, ob die hier irgendwie.
Ist hier in die Ecke gerannt.
Nice, und jetzt gehen wir direkt da. Komm, renn, Cranky, renn.
Ja, das
Geh,
noch
bitte
auf.
nicht in die Waldport, komm einfach mit. Junge.
Ich habe halt 10, also ich habe 10 HP. Lass mich mal blenden, dann hab ich Ult.
Oh, ich kann mit nichts nicht ausrüsten.
Ich gehe in diesen Tunnel rein. Einer CT.
Ich würde einfach mal ulten.
Aber ein.
Es scheint wieder einer zu flanken.
Einer ist los bei mir.
Achtung!
Ja, das ist der Box schon.
Den hab ich. Und Mitte war unter. Ne, Main.
Main,
Hab Molly für Main.
Bitte, bitte, ich bin low. Also, wenn dann